Hello, everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I took a couple of days off from my work to work out in the yard, and so I'm having a great time. But of course, I took pause from that to come in and do the podcast with you.
So yeah, we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about things that we can be doing out in the yard because
that's a fun, busy time.
It is. There's a lot of stuff to do because we're not quite to the point where we can be planting yet, and we'll talk about that. But there's a lot of things to do to get ready for that point, to get your yard and everything ready for that point. It's kind of a fun time too because we just planted seeds within the last week. We're starting to see seeds sprouting inside.
Yes.
And it's fun to see all that kind of coming together. So we're getting excited about getting out there and planting. But before we do that, we've got other things we got to do in the yard. We
do. Yes, absolutely. And of course, Easter coming up.
Right. So with Easter, I gotta ask, the big thing with Easter is Easter lilies, kind of a common gift, and people tend to get them year round, but especially around this time. Any thoughts for how to maintain Easter lilies because you can keep them and they will keep coming back, right?
They will. In fact, we're recording this right before Easter here. Right. And just today, my wife, Mary, brought home an Easter lily that she purchased. And the first thing we did, of course, her training was in florist. Okay, and so the Easter lily came home that she brought with that nice decorative foil. And of course, if you don't punch a hole in the bottom of that decorative foil, the water that you do, if it ponds up, it could drown that Easter lily. So of course, the first thing Mary did was take a knife and stab the bottom of that foil so it had a hole, and then set it in a drainage dish. And it was a little bit dry, so we checked it. The soil felt dry, so we watered it good and thoroughly. The buds are just starting to open, and that's great. As long as the buds are full and developed, they're going to continue to open. One was starting to open. And so one of the first things that you need to do when each of those flowers open, as soon as it opens and as soon as you can get a tweezer or your fingers into it, is pinch out the yellow stamens and anthers there, because those are the pollen-producing part of the flower. And if that pollen gets transferred to that central sticky pistil, it's called, it'll try to set seed. And that means that flower will start going downhill quicker.
Okay.
So in the florist, the actual florist shops, they will usually pick out that yellow, the yellow pollen producing one as soon as that flower opens up. And also that pollen, if it's shed, it gets on your table and tablecloth and kind of makes a little bit of a mess too. So your flowers will last longer if you remove those as soon as that flower opens up. And one of those on the plant that Mary got is almost ready to open. So we'll be removing those pollen producing things just as soon as possible. And also lilies like it not waterlogged, but moist. Don't let them dry out, bone dry, but check the soil and water it thoroughly when it does need. The nice thing about Easter lilies, too, is after they're done blooming, you can plant that outside. Now, the Easter lily, and of course, man, the fragrance of those is just awesome. Easter lily is borderline in hardiness for our northern area. But if you take that Easter lily plant, and after it's all done blooming, and after the weather is moderated, by the end of May or so at least, you can plant that lily out. And the interesting thing is it will bloom again in September for us.
Okay.
And then if you mulch it in the fall of the year, give it a good 18 to 24 inches of leaves or straw around it. And then next spring, it will come up. Its normal blooming time is when other lilies bloom, about the middle of summer.
Okay.
Is when lilies are blooming. And lots of people around have Easter lilies that they've been able to overwinter. But, instead of our zone 4, they're probably about a zone 5 lily. So they're definitely borderline in hardiness. But it's something fun to try. You have nothing to lose by planting it out. And again, it'll tend to the current growth will die down, and then it'll send up a new sprout. And that new sprout this first summer, like I mentioned, will bloom in September. And then in the future years, middle of summer, like other lilies. But it's fun to try. I've overwintered them successfully for a number of years.
Are Easter lilies at all like peace lilies in that you could keep it in a pot inside the house year round?
No.
Okay.
Nope. They, unlike the peace lily, which adapts very well, the peace lily isn't actually a true lily. They don't grow from a bulb. True lilies growing from bulbs. The Easter lily is a true bulb, kind of like an onion, true bulb. And that's why they're a little more flexible for being able to plant outdoors. I wish they were a little hardier. Wouldn't it be nice to always have beautiful Easter lilies blooming in our landscapes? But with a little work, it's possible.
All right. Well, so that was a question I had for you. Do you have a question that you brought this week?
I do. Sandy writes in and says she's got some areas in their yard that they need to seed. I do too. A lot of us have bare
like
areas.
Grass seed?
Grass seed. Yes,
Okay,
I'm sorry.
seed.
Yeah, she's got areas of it in her lawn that need reseeding. And she says, I have several large areas that need total reseeding in the lawn. Plus, I would like to overseed some of the other lawn areas. As I was looking at the grass seed today, I became confused about what is a good mixture of seed. Can you help me with this? Yeah, and when you go to the either garden center, the hardware store, or the national chain and start looking at grass seed, it can be confusing because there's lots of different types and different brands, and there's also different costs. Okay, let's first go to cost. A lawn can be in place for 100 years or more. So this isn't the time to try to chintz and save $1 or $2. You do get what you pay for in grass seed. And so I always opt for the most expensive grass seed I can buy. And I'm as frugal as the next guy. But the difference in grass seeds in price is that the best grass cultivars are more expensive. And so that's why the high quality grass seed is going to cost more, but it's well worth it. So then we look at the label and so forget about trying to economize. Next, look at the label. And for our area, our northern areas, the grass seed mix on that label should be at least 50% Kentucky bluegrass cultivars. Now, there will be different names, such as Park Kentucky bluegrass and Glade Kentucky bluegrass. There's even a Fargo Kentucky bluegrass. And so add the bluegrasses up. They should equal around 50%. And the others in the other mixes in the blend are going to be things like fescue, maybe a little ryegrass. But again, the main thing is to make sure there's enough Kentucky bluegrass. Now, that would be for a good sunny mix.
Right.
If you have shade of trees, maybe north side of a building, then look for a mix that has about 50% creeping red fescue for a shade mix. And there are a couple of great seed companies that are local. Mm-hmm. One is Agassi Seed, located out of West Fargo. They've got great grass blends that are tailored for our area. Another is Rivard Seed Company from northern Minnesota. They have great seed mixes. And so you'll find those brands at local garden centers, maybe some hardware stores, and also name brands, national, those are good too. But again, the key point is avoid the bargain brands, because one thing that they will have a lot of is just annual ryegrass. And annual meaning it grows for this season, maybe grows very nice, but then it dies over winter. And it's cheap seed. Also, the cheap blends tend to have more off types.
Yeah.
Maybe even, they're allowed a little bit of weed seed in there. They maybe push the limit on that. And so, it's not the time to economize. Get the good stuff.
I think after a winter or two with our dog, we realized that the spots and as she would go around the yard, that she would leave spots.
Sure.
And I picked up a bag that was relatively inexpensive, and it was of a spot filler.
Sure.
And it worked for that, but you could definitely tell too that those areas were more prone to weeding, and they didn't mix in with the red. They really did stand out as far as from the rest of the yard. Of course, this is an area where we let the dog run around, so it's not a pristine. This isn't a putting green or anything like that. But you do notice those things, and that's why you really do want to keep your eye open to get as much Kentucky bluegrass as you can in that mix, and also make sure that it's that these are, because especially in the some of the bigger box stores, they're getting in things that all the other bigger box stores are getting in from around the country.
Right.
They do not have the same mix, and so they do not have
may be things that aren't necessarily tailored to our northern area.
Right.
You mentioned your dogs. Do you follow your dogs around with the watering hose afterwards?
I try to be diligent, but sometimes I let them out when I'm still inside, and
that's an extra chore, isn't it? But to avoid the dog spots, trying to water and wash that right away afterwards does help.
Yeah,
it dilutes it, but of course, that's an extra job too. I was just curious if you.
That's part of what happens with a dog. Yeah, where you said, but it's also once the weather gets nice enough where grass starts growing and you start watering regularly, it becomes less and less of a problem.
Exactly. And of course, you might check too, there are certain grass seeds, if you've got dogs and kind of traffic and that, there are certain of the grass blends too that are tailored for kind of athletic turf, high traffic areas.
Is a
exactly.
term to look for.
Right, exactly.
Well, all this talk about getting out in the yard and doing things and getting green grass has got me really excited to have a good garden season. And you brought in a couple lists of things that we should be doing. I like
to work off lists. It reminds me what I need to do.
There's a lot to do.
Yes.
And so it is good to make yourself a list and things that you can check off, and then you'll feel like you accomplished more.
Yes, I love checking these things off as I do them. And one of the things that I checked off the list, in the fall of the year, I didn't get our lawn mowed quite as low as I would have liked. I ran out of time. And so in the spring here, I noticed, the grass has still been generally dormant and brown. The areas that I didn't get cut down, I mowed those fairly low. I didn't scalp it, but I lowered the mowing height lower than my normal summer mowing height so that I could just kind of clean up the grass a little bit, and which helped, and so now the green grass, when it comes, it won't have quite so much of that matted old dry stuff. And so I could check that off my list.
Nice. So let's take a look at some of the things that we've got here. Some of the things that we should be out doing in the yard. And you've got kind of a rule of thumb as far as like if you think that you can go out and get down in the yard and dig or plant or do anything in the yard, what's your rule of thumb for after a thaw, for when the ground is ready to be worked, or when you should be? You've got kind of a rule for that.
Well, one of those rules is when it's time to rake your lawn, if you need to get rid of some of the kind of fluff or thatch out of it, is to just kneel down on the grass. And if you get a wet spot on your jeans, well, then it's too wet to be doing too much in that grass because it's still too tender. And but if you come up off your knees with dry knees, well, then it's ready to work that lawn and do some good raking. Another rule of thumb is in the vegetable garden is if you squish a handful of the soil, and if it stays in a squishy wet ball, well, then it's too wet to work. And you can kind of destroy the structure of that. And, I've done that before. I've rototilled or spaded when the soil is too wet. I thought, I kind of want to get this done. And then it hardened into a bunch of golf balls. Ooh. And I struggled with those golf balls all season until finally they kind of broke down. So there's a good reason for, especially in heavy clay soil, not to work it when it's too wet. Now, when you squeeze that handful of soil, if you can immediately kind of crumble it back apart, then you're good to go. And I really envy the areas of the region where their soil is always like that. My grandparents farm out west of Fargo here, not in the Red River Valley. But even after rain, you could grab that handful of soil and it would crumble apart. It didn't get so gooey and wet. You still didn't want to do it right after rain, but it would dry and become more mellow. So anyway, right now here in Fargo, I'm not able to rototill yet because the soil is still too wet. And so I'm waiting on that a little bit yet. Oh, so talking about things that we right now can and should be doing, there's a window of opportunity here for pruning. Tree and shrub pruning generally should be done before things start to leaf out. If you do it after things have leafed out and you do trimming, you're cutting off the tree or shrub has wasted energy putting out leaves that you're just cutting off. So instead, prune them while they're dormant. So when they do start growing, all that energy goes into new growth. You're not cutting off stuff that they've wasted energy on. And so generally, now is a good opportunity to get out there and do some pruning, trimming. There are a couple of things we shouldn't do pruning yet. Birch and maple trees.
Okay.
Birch and maple trees, if they're pruned right now, before they leaf out, they'll start oozing sap. They'll start oozing their maple syrup, and birch does the same thing. In fact, I got an email from someone that said, oh, shoot, they wish they would have heard this earlier, me talking about it, because they pruned their maple, and now they got a bunch of maple syrup oozing down the trunk, and they wondered, is it going to be okay? Yeah, it's going to be fine. But, the tree isn't going to bleed to death, but it makes kind of a sticky mess oozing down. And so it'd be better with birch and maple to delay until the leaves are out and have started to fully expand. At that point, the sap won't be oozing out as much. And so delay birch and maple. On shrubs, if you want to get this year's lilac crop, wait until after they're done blooming, and then you can trim.
Okay.
It's not going to hurt it to trim now. And if you were going to do a heavy rejuvenation on old lilac, it's better to do it while it's dormant and before it has begun growth. And if you've got other shrubs, sometimes dogwoods become overgrown, and now would be a good time to give it a rejuvenation, cut down to 6 inches above ground level. They'll come back in gangbusters. So right now, we've got a window of opportunity. Things are going to start coming along fairly rapidly once we get warm weather. Now, our soil is still chilly, and for trees and shrubs and perennials to wake up, two things have to happen. Yeah, the air temperature has to get more mild, but also the soil temperature has to warm up. And right now, I checked across much of our region, North Dakota and Minnesota, as of today. Now, what's the date today, John? That we're
Boy, geez, today is the 17th.
I didn't look at the calendar.
April 17th.
I've been off. Why would I look at the calendar? April 17th. Okay. So looking at the soil temperature today at kind of the 2 to 4 inch, it's still about 34 degrees. So the soil is chilly. And the deeper down you go, then it's a little cooler than that even yet. And the frost is out of the ground. But until the soil temperature gets more like 50, not much is going to start growing. Now, when we get some warmer weather, and if we get a little warm rain, that soil temperature is going to start coming up fairly quickly. But once it starts, things are going to start popping. That's why we've got this little window of opportunity to try to get our pruning and stuff done. Also, apple trees. Now, apple trees were traditionally pruned also when they're still dormant. But there's been some new thinking on apple trees. So if you haven't got your apple tree pruned, don't worry, because there's some thinking by some very good plant pathologists that with apple trees, we might be better off delaying our pruning until after they've started to leaf out. And now here's why. Anytime we make a pruning cut, we're leaving an open wound. And apples are very sensitive, very susceptible to invasion by black rot fungus. In our area, it's very damaging to trees. In many cases, it shortens their lifespan to somewhere like 20 to 25 degrees, or 20 to 25 years. Okay, and if we delay our apple tree pruning until growth has actively started, which is shown by leaves starting to pop out, if we delay our pruning until that time, those pruning cuts will be sealed over much quicker.
Okay.
The cells will divide and they'll do all their things that compartmentalize that pruning cut. And there will be less of a window of opportunity for that black rot fungus to get in and invade those pruning cuts. Whereas if we prune apple trees while they're still dormant, there isn't active growing on that tree, and those wounds sit open until growth does start. So there's a greater window of opportunity for that black rot fungus to invade. So anyway, if you check most recommendations for apple tree pruning, they still say to prune when the tree is dormant. And if you've had any fire blight disease, that's important. But I'm going to start following the plant pathologist who has investigated this on fruit trees, and I'm going to delay and start our pruning on apple trees after they've already leafed out, and in fact, when some of the flower buds are starting to show a little color. So that's I think there's a lot to learn yet on some of the best apple tree pruning recommendations.
Just because you brought up dogwoods is a good time to kind of cut back on dogwoods. What about some other woody shrubs like Potentilla, Spirea, ninebark?
Yeah, they can all become kind of woody. Potentillas are beautiful, the yellow-flowered shrubs.
For one of the first flowers of the year.
Yeah, they're beautiful. And, of course, they can get kind of woody. And so every so often, it works well to do a fairly heavy pruning on those. And dogwoods also can get kind of woody and no longer have the bright red twigs. So some good pruning. Now, ninebarks also, after maybe 5-6 years, many of the stems get kind of old and very woody, and so now is a good time to prune them as well.
All right, let's take a quick little break. When we come back, more with the things to do earlier and now here in the spring, things to do before you actually get out and do your planting to make sure that you've got a good garden season.
Get 6 months of local news for just $2. You get unlimited access to the news and information you need to stay connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe to get 6 months of local news for just $2.
All right, we're back and we're talking about now that we're comfortably in spring. I don't, if there's another snowfall, it really won't last. I'm starting to see some green things kind of pop up both in the grass. I'm starting to see some weeds.
Our tulips are up. Some that I planted last fall, the tulips are up.
Yeah. So, while it's this exciting thing, we can't quite get out and, you really want to dive into the yard and do things. But we're still maybe a little ways away from some of that, but there are things that we can do.
There sure are. In fact, the reason I took a couple of days off here was to go home and get some of the pre-things done before, it's still a good time. And one of those is to clean up the perennial flower bed. Okay, most of us leave the tops, the above ground parts of most of our perennials on over winter time because it looks nice, helps catch snow, etc. And so, but now in the spring of the year, we need to clean those up before the new growth starts. So, and of course, that's gonna happen fairly soon. A lot's gonna change in the next couple of weeks or so. And so while the perennials are still dormant before the new growth starts, I haven't gotten all ours done. I'm just starting. But a person cuts the old stuff back to maybe about an inch above ground level. Like daylilies, if you didn't cut those back in the fall, daylilies, peonies, those if you didn't cut those back in the fall. So almost any of those perennials, we should remove the old dead above ground parts, and it's much better to do that before the new growth starts. Now, I have noticed that our iris are starting to poke a little bit of growth up through. So I need to get out there. I'll probably start with the iris, get the old stuff off, see if too much of the new growth comes up, then it starts intermingling with the old dead stuff, and then it's hard to remove the old dead stuff.
Right.
And so it's just so much easier here, while things are pretty much dormant yet, to get rid of the old stuff on the perennial beds. The same is true with the ornamental grasses. They've got the old haystack up there, the dry haystack up on top, and so that should be cut down to about an inch or so above ground level, because pretty soon the new growth is going to start from ground level trying to push up through all that. And so now, before that happens, get those mowed off. I use an old hedge clipper. I'll use. I also have kind of an electric hedge trimmer that sometimes that'll just saw those tops off. That works really, really good. And, some of the tops that you remove, if they weren't diseased, since ornamental grasses aren't usually diseased, they're usually at this time of year crisp and crunchy. You don't have to throw all that away. Depending on what you've got the bed mulched with, you can just kind of, even by hand, kind of crunch those up and leave those lay. I'm going to be remulching the surface of our flower beds with shredded bark. So anyway, I think this spring, I'm going to crunch up as many of these disease-free perennial tops as I can, and that'll give some good organic material. And then I'll be covering the whole area with wood chips, so it'll look nice too. But we don't need to haul off all that stuff. Peony tops, anything that was diseased, yes, get rid of that. But I'm going to save myself some work on hauling stuff away by just kind of crunching it all up and leave some of that lay. And if you watch on some national perennial flowering YouTubes, you'll see that. In fact, some of the old perennial tops are so crunchy, you don't even need to cut some of them off. Ornamental grasses, yeah, they're kind of tough, so cut those off. But some of the others, you can just kind of bend the twigs, bend the old stems by hand, and they'll just snap off at about the right level too, and then just crunch them up by hand and leave some of it as a mulch around. That can be done too. Okay. So we don't need to clear everything out of there. Some of the stuff will just turn into good organic matter too. So very important to get the perennial bed cleaned up, or any ornamental grasses, get them all cut down. And let's see. Let's see. I'm making sure that on the list that I made myself here that I'm getting everything listed here that I need to do. And so then the other big question is, when can we actually start planting some of the things? And I'm getting these questions, and I'm noticing on some of the Facebook gardening groups, people asking, when can we start doing some planting? And so now that brings up a good question is, when is it safe to plant?
Right.
I never trust April. And I don't trust the first half of May, because the chances of getting a killing frost in April are almost 100%. And in the first half of May, the chances are likely also we'll get a frost. But the closer that we get into the middle of May, the end of May, each day in May, the chances of frost lessen. And so when is it safe? We've had frost in June. So there's no, Mother Nature doesn't give many guarantees. And so anything that is in full leaf, it's wise to wait until sometime probably after the middle of May and look at that as kind of a guideline. I like the 10-day window between about May 15th and May 25th for planting things out that have the possibility of getting frosted. There's still a chance you might have to cover some things. But for anything like tomatoes, tomato plants, peppers, any of that type of thing that we're planting out, even flowering containers, I think if we get into that 15th to 25th of May, at that point you can kind of eye up and see, okay, is the weather looking pretty good here, or are they forecasting cold nights? So regardless of if we have some warm weather in April, sometimes that'll fool us. Warm weather in April, you think, oh gosh, spring has arrived, and then bingo, you'll get a frost in May.
Right.
But there are some planting things you can do in April when you get the itch, things that aren't going to be damaged by frost. In fact, one of the things you should plant in April when the soil's still chilly are sweet peas. The flowering sweet peas?
Yeah. That's kind of I didn't know about that.
Yes, they like it cool. They like chilly soil. And so I remember my mom always planting, she was a good gardener, always planting the sweet peas along the garden fence in April. Sometimes when I've delayed and until I planted the rest of the garden, the sweet peas have come up, but then the warm weather comes and they don't like the warm weather as much. So if they can get established when it's cool and chilly, and they love chilly soil, and so I'm going to plant the sweet pea seed fairly soon. There are some vegetables that also like chilly soil. Not only do they like chilly soil, but they're capable of germinating in chilly soil, and they aren't very sensitive to frost. So in the vegetable garden, we can get things going like spinach and lettuce and kale. Radishes do well.
Yeah.
The greens like that, carrots. You can plant potatoes about the end of April.
Okay.
Potatoes on Good Friday, usually Good Friday when it comes early, that's kind of a little iffy. But towards the end of April, you could even plant your potatoes if you wanted to. And peas, the edible peas, you could plant those. So there are definitely some cool season vegetables are called, cool season crops that you could plant in your garden the end of April here.
Okay.
The other part, the other half of the vegetables are called warm season crops. Those are things that they will not sprout in cool soil. And if you plant plants of them in chilly soil, like tomato transplants and pepper transplants, they can be permanently injured and stressed, never to recover if you plant them in chilly soil. The soil should warm up to 55 degrees or more before you set those out. And that's why we wait until the end of May. And also, they're very frost sensitive. If they get down close to 32, sometimes it doesn't even take 32, and they'll be cold temperature injured. So cool season crops, yeah, we can get those planted when we get the itch. The warm season crops, other warm season crops besides tomato and pepper, things like sweet corn, eggplant, string beans, they're fairly frost sensitive, and those should all wait. Melons, squash, cucumber, all love the warm weather, warm soil, and so those we should delay. Now, what about trees, shrubs, perennials that you buy from garden center? Okay, when is it safe to plant those? Well, some garden centers sell bare root trees and shrubs. They're dormant. And since they're dormant, not in full leaf, you could plant those anytime now. Because they're not in full leaf, when we get a frost, it's not going to hurt anything. The twigs are used to going through wintertime. The branches aren't going to be harmed by frost. So bare root material could be planted now, including any bare root perennials that you might have. But anything that is in full leaf, like potted trees, shrubs that maybe were forced in a greenhouse somewhere, if they're in full leaf, they would be subject to frost injury on those leaves. And when the frost injures leaves on trees, shrubs, or perennials, they're going to have to put out all new leaves, and that's a major stressor. So anything in full leaf like that should delay until after danger of frost is done. Same with perennials. If potted perennials in full leaf would be subject to frost injury. So those should wait until probably the last half of May, unless you're willing to cover them.
Okay.
I should mention too, what if you do decide to roll the dice and plant something that's in full leaf, say the end of April, 1st of May? Okay, what if they do forecast frost? Well, some things we can do to protect them. Plastic is not the best. The best way I heard of describing that is in the wintertime, would you rather have a cloth winter coat or a plastic winter coat? That makes me chilly thinking about it. And so plastic is not the best insulator on plants, especially if it would contact the leaves of the plants. Okay, so better than that, a cardboard box. We save our old bed sheets, and cloth on top of leaves is quite good. If all you have is plastic, create a frame so that you could put the plastic up on the frame, or stick a couple of lawn chairs or something and then put the plastic up over that. So you're making a tent over the plant. So rather than the plastic touching the leaves, you're creating maybe a plastic shield around the area, if I'm making sense.
Okay.
So, cardboard, newspaper, different things like that. But especially if we start getting a number of frosts repetitive nights, it can be a hassle to kind of cover things because then they have to be uncovered during the day. Or you could move, if you've done some planters, you could move them into the garage overnight. A common question that I get too is, because we all like to go to the garden centers as soon as we can, and they've got plants usually ready to go. And, but if we aren't ready to plant yet, a common question that we used to get in the garden center was, I'm not ready to plant these yet. Is it okay just to keep them in the garage for a while, for a week or two until I'm ready? And the answer is no. Because those plants are grown in a nice, bright, sunny greenhouse, and if we put them in our dim garage for a week or two, they're going to languish and go downhill. Then by the time we go to plant them out, they're going to be of very low energy and probably stretching and not look so hot anymore. So if you do want to buy early, yes, on a frosty night, stick them in the garage, but then use that opportunity to harden them off, toughen them in. And which is a good transition between the greenhouse in which you bought them to your outdoor planting conditions. So to harden plants off, put them in a sheltered spot in the yard, maybe half-day sun, half-day shade until they kind of get used to the full brunt of the elements. Give them some wind protection and generally or slowly increase their exposure to wind and to the elements and to full sun. So gradually transition them over maybe a week or two, and that's called hardening them off, toughening them in. And that helps get used to being planted outdoors. One thing that we need to be a little cautious of is if when we buy a plant right out of the greenhouse, and if we planted that out in the full brunt of the elements, it could kind of get a little wimpy, wind battered.
Probably some shock.
Shock, exactly. And so we can minimize that shock by hardening them in, gradually exposing them to the elements. And then they develop kind of a toughening of their cells. And then when you do plant them out, they're ready to take off.
How long, I think you talked about it, but just to see, how long should we be hardening things off for? You said about a week or two?
Yeah.
I mean, is that
somewhere between a week to 2 weeks?
So basically you could go out if you really wanted to get your plants, make sure you got all your plants that you wanted, go out, late April up until May 1st. And
you can start doing some buying as long as you put it out during the day on the sunny days. And now, occasionally we need to buy the plants and get them planted. And maybe we don't always have a week to 10 days to harden things off. That's why many of us will, with our tomato plants and different things, will give them some protection in the garden right after we planted them. Like sometimes I try to grow all our own tomato plants, but sometimes there'll be a few varieties at the garden center that I buy, and maybe I'm ready to plant them right out into the garden, don't have time to harden them off, enough lead time. And so after planting them in the garden, I know that they're going to be kind of tender and sensitive, fresh out of the greenhouse. That's why many of us will stick an old coffee can around.
Oh, okay.
Or, some sort of protection just for a few days so that they don't get wind whipped so much and so that the full brunt of the elements and everything isn't quite so hard on them. And so using 3-pound coffee cans used to be the thing, but you don't get much coffee in metal coffee cans anymore. And but maybe it's a plastic milk jug where most of the top has been cut out and the bottom cut out that you can put around it. Some of the old timers used to use an old wood shingle stuck in, kind of just to shelter it a little bit from the wind. But now we have to be a little more creative now to give some of those things that protection if you haven't had time to harden them off in advance.
All right. Let's take another quick break. When we come back, more with things that we can do to get our yard ready to go.
If you're loving this podcast, be sure to check out our full lineup. From news and local politics to sports and true crime, find your next great listen right now at inforum.com/podcasts. That's inforum.com/podcasts.
All right, we're back and we're talking about things that we can do to get our yard in good shape for our gardens before we actually get out and plant. We just talked about hardening things off in the yard or hardening off new plants before we get them into the ground for a period of time. What else do you got?
Yeah, I've got some more things for the checklist of what we need to do. Now, when we're out buying our garden seeds for planting, buy extra for the middle of summer.
Okay.
Because oftentimes the garden seed racks will disappear at a certain point after spring. And if you plan ahead and buy some types of plants, vegetables, we can get a second crop. But we have to have the seeds for it. So lettuce, spinach, radish, beets, kale, you can get a second crop later in the summer. After the first crop is kind of done, you can get a second crop planted late July, first part of August. You can plant those, and then you'll have a fall crop.
Okay.
But if the seed rack has already disappeared, you're out of luck. So think ahead and buy a few extra packs, especially for that. And now, when you are buying tomato plants at the garden center, choose ones with a deep green leaf. Mm-hmm. Be wary of tomato plants that are kind of yellowish, light green. That means they've been stressed for nutrition.
Okay.
They'll come out of that with fertilizer, but it's better if you start with good, fresh, deep green plants.
Okay.
They'll take off just a little better. And now, whether you're planting tomato plants, pepper plants, any of the vegetable plants, or also flower plants that you put in containers, they'll take off better if you water them in right away with a starter fertilizer. So a starter fertilizer, there are some fertilizers packaged for that, starter fertilizers for new transplants, or you can just use the all-purpose water-soluble one, and there's a rate on there usually for newly transplanted plants. It's a little weaker dilution on that. But yeah, fertilizing right when you're planting, that gets them off to a good start. On the lawns, we might be tempted this time of year because all the stores are advertising lawn fertilizer, but actually the best time to fertilize the lawn is to wait until Memorial Day.
Okay.
You aren't going to kill your lawn if you fertilize it now. But until the lawn is green and growing, it doesn't really need that extra nutrition. And some of that could get wasted and run down the drains if we get a heavy rain. So about Memorial Day, the lawn will be nice and green, actively growing, and that's when it can immediately use the fertilizer.
Okay.
So if it's on sale now, buy it, but then wait to apply it for a while, closer towards Memorial Day. And as soon as we can, raise that mowing height on the lawn to about 3 inches. So even if you want to give the first mowing a little bit shorter to clean things up, but pretty quick here as the lawn is growing, up it to about 3 inches. And a couple other things on the list is roses need pruning now. Even our hardy roses, because we didn't have much snow cover, we had a lot of dieback. The dieback on a rose is easily identified. The canes are brownish black, so you follow it from the tip on down. The live part is green on that cane. The cane itself is green even before any growth starts. And so you prune them all the way back down to that sharp demarcation line where you have the green canes. And mine, I'm going to have to most of them prune down to about 2 inches above ground level. They froze down that far. So, but they'll be okay. So make sure you get your roses pruned here. It's better to do that before much growth starts and to get that old dead top off of that. Now, when we are buying things at the garden center, bedding plants, perennials, I like to cut off that first blossom that they have. I mean, the blossom tells me what color it is, but for example, perennials need time to develop themselves. And if they're wasting a lot of energy on a flower stalk, then they aren't going to grow quite as much. They aren't going to root in as much. They aren't going to fill out as much. So perennials, the first growing season really is an investment in the plant and not the blossom. So, grit your teeth, take a shears and cut off that blossom on that. The perennials will be better in the long run. I also like to, on annual bedding plants, excuse me, I like to take off the first flowers that you see there because, again, that will help encourage the plant itself to fill out. In the long run, you'll get much more. So instead of the one little weak blossom on the petunia, I cut that off and any buds and let the strength go into the developing plant. And my mom taught me that. At the time, I thought, gosh, that's kind of crazy. You're getting rid of some pretty bloom. But she knew it works.
And in no time at all, you'll get a flush.
They bounce back. And so you've sacrificed a little bit of weak blossom at the beginning. But boy, the investment for the rest of the summer is well worth it. And so when you're looking at potting up your containers outside, many of us reuse the soil from year to year. And so your containers outside that still have last year's potting mix in, hopefully last fall you took out the plants. Right. That's important with all the leaf litter and the stuff that disease could hide on. But there's no reason to dump out all that. You can take out maybe a fourth or so, add some fresh in, and that becomes a good mix again. Make sure you're fertilizing as the season goes on, because if it did have some slow release fertilizer, that is probably gone.
I got a question about that. We have we do that. We recycle some of the old, but then we're still left with some stuff that left over from the recycling. I wonder, we're going to be putting in some vegetable beds. Could I use that in the bottom of a vegetable bed and then top that with still new soil?
Yeah, because that's a good mix, and a good use of that, the amount you scoop out to make room for some new, is in the bottom of something else.
Okay.
Because it's a good material. There's really nothing wrong with it. And so I love that too. And, what I get a kick out of it is, when we take some out of the when we take some of the old stuff out, well, that encourages me to have more and more planters, because I need somewhere to put that old stuff. Yes. So may as well buy a few more planters. Yes. and have a bottom of somewhere else to put it, if you follow me. And so now, it's not going to be too long, and we'll be into May. And our perennials and roses are going to start into full leaf. And the first part of May is a good time to fertilize. Maybe it's the water-soluble type that you dump 2 or 3 gallons on a perennial. When we do apply water-soluble type, we need to put enough so it's going to get down into the root system. So if it's an established perennial or shrub, 2 to 3 gallons is probably appropriate on that. And so give it enough. So start fertilizing already in May, then maybe again in June. This is also the time that we should take tree wraps off of any of the fruit trees that we wrapped, or any of the young trees that we wrapped in the fall of the year. We want the bark to be exposed to the sun and the elements for the growing season. Yeah. That'll help toughen up the bark. And some of the tree wraps can start constricting. If they're tightly against the tree trunk, they could actually be constricting growth. So time to get rid of our tree wraps. We've got to check that off our list. I got a couple of them off. I got a few more to go on our fruit trees. Also, on a young tree, if we can keep the grass away from the trunk, not only will that protect it from string trimmer and mower injury, but also grass has been shown to really sap the strength out of a young tree. So, and if we do that, the young tree isn't going to grow as fast. So about a 5-foot diameter of wood mulch. And wood mulch alone applied onto the lawn, it seems the lawn grass has a way of poking up through that and continuing. That's why I like to, around the tree first. Okay, and I've got some more that I need to do. There's grass growing up to a young tree that I planted last year. So I like to get cardboard, just the brown corrugated plain cardboard, overlap it good in kind of a circle, fashion a circle around the tree, and then put your shredded bark mulch over that cardboard. That cardboard has a good smothering effect, and over the course of about 3 years, it'll break down, but in the meantime, it has smothered out that grass below it. So keeping that circle around young trees, fruit trees, very, very important. I mentioned our tulips are coming up.
Yeah.
Important this time of year to fertilize the tulips. Could be a granular 10-10-10 all-purpose fertilizer or water-soluble. I enjoy sprinkling just the 10-10-10. The directions on that package tell for a certain square foot of area how much to put on that area. The importance of fertilizing tulips this time of year is Well, of course, we're going to get bloom pretty soon on them, but that bulb has to store up energy for next year already. I like the way on many of these things, it's not just dealing with this season, we're thinking about the future.
Right.
So if we fertilize the tulips in late April, May here as they're growing, when they're forming next year's flower bud already, they'll have nutrition to go on. If you don't fertilize tulips, next year the bloom is going to be noticeably weaker. So giving that fertilizer in the spring, late April, May, really important for tulips.
Another thing for some people to keep in mind around tulips, especially if they're coming up now, maybe put some chili flakes or some red pepper flakes around there to keep the bunnies away. I know that we used to have a number of tulips. I think we're down to about one now. Because of bunnies. So don't be afraid to put those out there.
You got it. And
I go to the dollar store and I get this big of a can of just red pepper flakes, and I'll go out and dump that around.
Yes, and it's important to shut the barn door before the horse gets stolen.
Yeah. Try to preserve some things there.
It's interesting you mentioned that, John, because I planted a bunch of tulips last fall, and of course I was out looking at them, and one of them looked like it had some bunny munching on it. And I think, oh shoot, I got to get some stuff put around it. And so thanks for reminding me about getting the red pepper flakes and stuff put around those.
I'm sure there are other things that work, but I've just red pepper flakes. Like I said, I go to a dollar store.
Scent, many of the repellents work on scent types of smell. And, when rabbits smell the red pepper, well, they kind of lose their appetite for the tulips. And so, tulips are like candy. It's fresh stuff coming up for those. And so very important to do that. And, so I think if we focus on the things that we've talked about, I think that kind of covers the next several weeks of what we need to get accomplished. And I've got tomorrow off as well. And so I'm going to try to get as many of these things checked off my list as possible.
That sounds like you're setting yourself up. Yeah, you're setting yourself up pretty well.
But that's why I like lists. I actually do check them off because then that gives me a feeling of accomplishment.
Well, Don, if people have any questions for what they should be doing in their yard, or if they're spotting things coming up in their yard, or if they have just any questions in general, what's the best way to reach you?
Yeah, send me an email, donald.kinsler, Kinzler, at ndsu.edu. And thank you for Michael for sending me, he listens to our podcast, he sent me photos of his man cave. Okay. And his man cave is a room in his garage that he partitioned off and can heat it. He's got plant lights, he's got house plants, he's got stuff growing out there, and he said his man cave is a plant cave. So he's got plants started in there and he's ready to go. And so I appreciate that. It was fun to see what he's got going.
Yeah, you don't always have to send Don questions. If you just want to send something that you're really proud of.
We share our successes.
Exactly. Well, Don, thanks again for coming in. I know that you've been busy in your yard. We'll let you get back to that, but thanks for coming in.
Yeah, I'm going to head back outside. And thank you, John, and thanks everyone for listening.